All right, let's talk about Greenland. You look at a map, and geographically, it's clearly part of North America. But politically, it's all European. And visually, well, it's just a land of incredible contradictions. This massive island has a history that's so much richer and more contested than you might guess from just looking at all that ice.
I mean, to really wrap your head around the scale here, just picture this. It is the world's largest island, and almost the whole thing is buried under a colossal sheet of ice. And yet, its entire population could fit inside a single football stadium, with room to spare. It's that paradox, this vast, empty, frozen place, that makes its history so fascinating.
And that really gets us to the big question, doesn't it? Why has this remote, icy island been such a hot commodity throughout history? Well, the answer is an amazing story of exploration, survival, and some serious global power plays. Okay, so our story kicks off way, way back, long before any Europeans arrived. The first people here were the Paleo-Eskimos, living there as far back as 2500 BC. But the conditions were just unbelievably brutal, and eventually they were gone, leaving the island totally abandoned. It was going to take a complete chance encounter to put it back on the map.
So fast forward to the 10th century, you've got this Norwegian sailor, a guy named Alfsen, who's just trying to sail to Iceland. But bam, a massive storm hits and blows him way, way off course. He finds himself looking at this unknown coast, a desolate landscape of ice mountains so forbidding he didn't even go ashore. But man, when he got back, the stories he told really sparked some curiosity.
And this is where the most famous character in this whole story enters the picture, Eric the Red. He was an exiled Norwegian explorer, and he decided he was going to sail west and find this land Alfsen was talking about. And after a truly treacherous journey that cost him half his ships, he finally landed on the southwestern coast and set up what would become the very first settlement. But here's the thing about Eric. He wasn't just an explorer. He was a brilliant marketer. He sails back to Iceland and pitches this new land, and he cleverly calls it Greenland to attract settlers. And you know what? It totally worked. Over the next few decades, waves of Vikings came over, building 3 main settlements. The eastern settlement was the biggest by far, mostly because the climate there was just a little bit milder. But Greenland wasn't just the final destination. It actually became a launchpad for one of the greatest discoveries in history. While he was out exploring, Eric's own son, Leif Erikson, also got blown off course and landed in what is now Canada. He established a small settlement he called Vinland in modern-day Newfoundland, becoming the first European in North America, a full 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Incredible, right? But the Norse weren't alone for long. Around 1050, the Thule people, who are the ancestors of the modern Inuit, showed up from the west, bringing dog sleds and advanced harpoons. And the difference in how they survived was just stark. The Norse were farmers, trying to rely on livestock. But the Thule, they were absolute masters of the Arctic Sea, getting most of their food from whaling and sealing. And this adaptation gave them a critical edge for what was coming next.
Which brings us to our second chapter. As the Norse settlement was struggling just to hang on, Greenland's fate was increasingly being decided not on the island itself, but in the royal courts of Europe. It was about to become a piece in a much, much larger game. And believe me, the handovers happened incredibly fast. In 1317, Norway claims it. Just 3 years later, Sweden conquers Norway, and boom, Greenland comes with it. Then, by the late 1300s, Denmark forms the Kalmar Union and just absorbs Greenland into its own growing empire. For the actual settlers on the island, who was in charge became this distant, foreign idea. And then a double catastrophe struck. The Little Ice Age sent temperatures plummeting, which made the Norse way of farming pretty much impossible. At the exact same time, the Black Death arrived on trade ships, and it just devastated the already weakened population. By the early 1500s, the Scandinavian colonies were gone. They either died out or fled, leaving the much better adapted Thule people as the sole inhabitants of the entire island.
So for centuries, Greenland was just this remote Danish territory. And in the 20th century, its strategic importance just exploded. All of a sudden, this giant icy rock in the middle of the North Atlantic became one of the most important pieces of real estate on the entire planet. America's interest in the region really started kind of subtly. Back in 1917, during World War I, the U.S. bought the Danish West Indies, which we now call the U.S. Virgin Islands, from Denmark. The price was a cool $25 million. But here's the crucial part of the deal that almost nobody talks about.
The U.S. formally agreed to drop any and all of its own claims on Greenland. This set a fascinating precedent. It showed that America was willing to negotiate and pay for strategic Danish territory. And that idea, it was definitely going to come back in a big way. Okay, fast forward to World War II. In 1940, Nazi Germany invades and occupies Denmark. This left Greenland in a really perilous position. So to keep it from falling into Nazi hands, the United States made a very bold move. On April 9, 1941, U.S. forces landed and occupied the island, setting up crucial air and naval bases.
So why was it so vital? Well, first off, it sat on the most direct air route for flying supplies from America to Europe. Second, its weather stations were absolutely essential for forecasting, including for the D-Day invasion. And third, its naval bases were key for hunting German U-boats. It was, without a doubt, America's Arctic fortress.
After the war, you'd think its importance would fade, right? Nope, it only grew. During the Cold War, if you look at a globe, Greenland's location was the perfect spot for an early warning radar system to spot Soviet bombers or missiles coming over the North Pole. It was literally the front line in a potential nuclear war. Realizing just how valuable it was, the U.S. tried to buy it outright. In 1946, the Truman administration made a secret offer to Denmark. The price? A staggering $100 million, which is the equivalent of over $1 billion today. That Denmark refused. They just weren't willing to sell. Instead, they cut a deal. The U.S. was granted permanent rights to build and operate the massive Thule Air Base in the far north of the island. And just like that, America's military presence was cemented for decades to come. But, while all these superpowers were playing chess with the island, the actual people of Greenland were forging their own identity. And this brings us to our final chapter, a nation's new flag, and the quiet but very determined path to self-rule.
A major turning point came in 1982. See, Greenland had been automatically pulled into the European Union along with Denmark back in 1973. But a lot of Greenlanders felt the Union's fishing policies were destroying their main industry. So they held a referendum, and a clear majority voted to leave. The decision took effect in 1985, making Greenland the only territory to ever actually withdraw from the EU. And that was just the beginning. In 1985, Greenland adopted its own unique national flag, a really powerful symbol of its distinct identity. Then, in 2008, Greenlandic replaced Danish as the one and only official language. Each of these steps has moved the nation further down the path towards self-rule, really laying the groundwork for a future as a fully independent nation.
So when you look at the whole story, it's just incredible. It's gone from a Viking outpost to a forgotten colony to a critical military fortress, and now to an aspiring nation on the verge of independence. It's an amazing story of resilience and identity. The only real question now is, what does the future hold for this unlikely prize?